what is your right now your current project? What you're working on?
So I've got a couple, 2 or 3 things going on actually. So I've been helping out with senior design at NC State University for a while. So that's allowed me to kind of launch some projects with some students. One of those that we started was originally for our own needs, but I think it's relevant a lot to this audience. And like it's what I mentioned, was it's a source code scanner. But if you think about an organization that has many services, like, and they might be microservices, there might be some network config projects, there might be some application software. One of the things that at least every place I've ever worked at, they never really paid attention to the actual trends inside their source code, right? So how active is this project? Who are the top contributors today versus yesterday? How are people flowing between projects? What are the most popular directories, the most commonly edited files? So one of these projects is Source Optics. It's sourceoptics.io. And we look at a project across all the branches because that's something that GitHub doesn't do, right? So we can tell what's going on. We can generate graphs. We can graph one project against another. We can actually graph a single person's history inside an organization and watch them, watch their efforts change between projects as they move on between different repos. So that could be potentially a really interesting tool for management. And while that feature doesn't exist now, it's all a time series database. So we could actually inject outage events and other life cycles or release numbers or things like that into the time stream. So I think there's a future for like some more interesting analytics later. But one of those things right now is, can I characterize if this project is increasing or decreasing? And that's kind of an interest. Who are the people that are refactoring the most? As we think about team dynamics, a lot of times that we think the people who are leaders on a team might just be the people that talk the most in the meetings, right? So can we give credit to employees that are making frequent impacts or working in a lot of different places that may not be getting credit from the rest of the team? So it was originally developed for just understanding team dynamics and undergraduate teaching, but just thinking about that same use case about services at the same time, where that one microservices shop I was working at, we had to write like a whole control panel. What version is deployed? Who's the leader of the service? Can we find out some of this stuff automatically, right? So that's pretty interesting.
You have anything you can show us?
I do. Let me go ahead and share my screen here. Okay, so it's a multi-tenant project. So these could be departments at a company, these could be teams, whatever. But I've already just gone ahead and imported a lot of random open source project that I was interested in. And the idea here is to just show you what's available, what kind of statistics we can get. You're looking at a very early build of what my students have been working on this semester. They've done a really good job. But what we have here is we have all the repositories sorted alphabetically. So since we're talking about Ansible, I can click on like the graphs icon here, and I can do things like graph the contributors over time. But it's a time series database. So like if I were to pick, if I just want to show the Ansible that I was a part of here, we're going to stop in 2015. We can generate a graph that shows how many commits that I've made over time on this project. And then it shows the other top 10 contributors and other, which is everyone who didn't make the top 10, which is kind of like, for an open source project, it's like the long tail of contribution. Right. And then if I wanted to change this to just show like the first year of Ansible, I can reload the page. Now it's just showing the first year. So that was something that like GitHub Insights didn't do. It didn't find that time series view. So here on the right-hand side, you see everybody that was involved with Ansible and for making a really big impact when it wasn't a company yet. Really thankful for all those people. But I can also go to a tabular view of the same information, and I can sort people by the number of commits, the number of files that they've created, the number of days that they've committed to the project. So in that first year, I made 305 commits, right? So there's some cool statistics there. The other thing I can do, see if the tool plays nice. This is the graph of every open source project in SourceOptics' history that has a commit from me on it, right? And I only have a few of them imported, but you can see in the beginning, like I was working on the Cobbler project, and here's a project called Vert Factory. Here's Funk, and here's Ansible. So if you can imagine that at a workplace where somebody was working and somebody's just saying, hey, I just met this person. I wonder what projects they work on. This tool can tell you. If you're a new developer and you want to kind of understand who's the expert in a particular code base, like suppose I pick this file explorer view. This is a live demo, so it's probably not going to work, right? Might work.
That's the rule of thumb, my friend. That's the rule of thumb.
It's going to work. This page will melt your CPU. But what this does, it gives you a graph for every single directory in the entire code base, and you can dive down, and it'll tell you who the top developers are for working on each individual directory. So you can see, like over time, directory looks interesting here. These are all, I don't even know what these directories are. Files that were deleted and accidental files checked in. But you can kind of see the history and identify who was like the person you should ask your question to. So that's kind of cool.
So it almost becomes like a coding kind of resume, right, for contributors and stuff to different projects and things like that.
Yeah, yeah, I think like it's dangerous to use to go back to the 2000 era idea of metrics in terms of actually I need to get so many lines of code, right? Because like more concise code is sometimes better.
Right.
But it is nice to know like who's involved and just to be able to use that as a way to know what questions you might want to ask. So here's a pie chart view. So if you can imagine your group project and you say, well, who are the people that are making an impact to this project within this time slice, right?
Yeah. Well, I think that's interesting of knowing who makes the impact, right, and who to go ask the question of, so that you don't, send 5 different emails to the wrong people that can never answer your question because they haven't been involved in it, right?
Wait a minute, I give you another use case to look at. I mean, we're in the networking world, the IT world, and in IT, this sells, graphs sells, and not only to know what or who been working on the project, but what everyone's been working on anyway, right? So I think that part makes this. I mean, this is a very valuable tool.
Yes, so, we were talking about Python earlier. This is, I just give them a quick plug. This is made by a library called Plotly. It's super easy to use, Plotly. There's a lot of really, really good Python graphing libraries out there. Python's widely used for like data science with libraries like Pandas and NumPy and all these other things. So if you have some data you want to crunch, you want to generate some graphs, I've only scratched the surface, but it's a great environment for that kind of thing. I have one other project I can show. Rock Chisel is this is something that I hope everybody can use, but it's a documentation system. So it basically lets you build very simple documentation web pages for projects that you might work on, like at your work, and you can write them in HTML, and it has all these cool things like built-in syntax highlighting. You can has built-in macros for cool little things like this alert box or built-in quizzes to see if people are paying attention to your documentation. But that was a new project I just started recently too.
Well, in IT, we don't do documentation.
Sometimes it's like there's this wiki and there's a lot of old information from 12 years ago, and maybe it's correct.
No, that's so. Look at your new tool, right? So if someone wanted to get started, this is actually in product, right? This is what you put together. But how difficult is it to actually start your documentation? Is it template based or?
It just lets you write HTML. So there's a very small very, if you go to this authoring page, it'll tell you how to do it. But the documentation for Rock Chisel is written with Rock Chisel. So for instance, the index page here is just HTML, which is easy. But then there's a very small file here that basically builds a table of contents and just patches everything together. So this was written in just a couple of days, pretty much.
Okay.
It comes from an interesting lesson, though. So when Ansible was being developed, I wrote the documentation in Sphinx, and that was a really good contribution from one of our users. But I told a lot of people I probably spend about 40% of my time on the docs, and we say, hey, we say network people don't write docs or developers don't write docs. If you want people to get a hold of your idea and use it, that is how you get them to use it. It's not about good code. People don't really care about what the code looks like so much. What they do care about is, can they learn it, and can you teach somebody to be effective and have a really strong win with the product or the idea in like 30 minutes or so. So anything that can kind of get people to learn something quicker is good. So with like we talked about wikis, wikis tend to be out of date, but if you had a source code repo, maybe people would be more likely to contribute to it because if you just open their editor and it could live along with the code or something like that.
You're right. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Stop sharing my screen here.
Awesome. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you for sharing.
And that's the next tool that I want to see is automatic documentation. Documentation, you just don't do anything, just spits it out and say, man, how'd you read my mind? Hey guys, so
Something.
any more questions for Michael?
Yeah, I've just got one. So us guys at Unix-like, we're all about spreading the word out into the industry about network programmability and automation. And what I'm just wondering, what sort of advice would you give to someone who's looking to start in network automation from scratch? Just a green guy.
Good question.
You are on mute, Michael, by the way. You are on mute. You are on mute, by the way.
Go ahead.
I'm on mute. He's on mute.
You're good. You're good. Go ahead.
Okay. I may be one of the worst people to ask about that, right? So I have the weird experience of building a tool like explicitly for servers that kind of grew into a cloud tool, and I know a fair amount about cloud things. And the network stuff kind of was like an interesting but unpredictable addition. So
Let me lay something out for you, okay? Let me lay, and this is the average, I guess, profile of what we're talking about. 20 years. Guy comes in, 20 years experience putting hardware, configuring hardware. And then one day he realizes that I have to learn what the API is. I have to learn what Ansible is. I have to learn what Python is, right? Most people watching this, that's exactly, what they went through. So, obviously coming into this industry, 18, what have you, computer science major, you're learning about, Python, maybe 3 or 4 classes. You probably get to the point where you know what a loop is, but it's slow and gradual, right? Right now, when you think you know, you don't know. And now you're learning Python, APIs, and so forth. So that's the level set, and just, some advice on, if I was just starting 20 years in, trying to get acclimated, trying to be a developer, right, if you will.
yeah, I think Python in general is pretty easy to learn because it kind of had those original roots long ago as like a teaching language. So I guess don't be afraid to experiment. It's okay to start small with, random programs, find something you're interested in. My example wasn't necessarily the super easiest, but I used to write, when I learned a new language, usually John Conway passed away recently. Conway's Game of Life, right? It could be tic-tac-toe, it could be whatever you want to do. Some of these data science libraries graph something cool. It's pretty easy to just try stuff and get started. And the nice thing about Python is it's very hard to do something the wrong way. So don't necessarily be worried that your code's not perfect, right?
It's not hard. It's not hard. I do it the wrong way all the time. It's not hard.
I don't think there is a right way. Right? It kind of keeps you on good guide rails anyhow, right? And there's some good libraries out there. depending on what you want to do.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you for the advice. You know, for me, and sometimes when you do something for so long, like for example, most of us have been doing this for over 20 years, and I've been in technology. I start explaining things to someone, you know, because I know it's easy. I think it's easy, but it's hard for me to put myself in their shoes. At some point, someday, there was a point in my life when I was sitting there going, I would never know how to do TCP/IP, how to subnet, and so forth.
Yeah, I mean, maybe that's a good question to turn around for you, right? So, like from a developer's perspective, what a developer wants to understand, you know, the ins and outs of networking hardware, you know, barely understands what a subnet is. You know, where do they start, right? Are there, you know, what are the good simulators? And I think one of the things that is helping people, and it's hard for me, exactly what you just said. It was like, after you've been doing it so long, you forget what the good ways of learning things are. But because there are things like, you know, AWS now, it is easier to experiment with the building blocks and the basics of some of those kind of things, but it just gets difficult where the cloud makes that feel like in a very, very different flavor from like a physical data center or one cloud to another, right? So it's still a challenge, but it, like before, getting a hold of a data center was a hard thing, right? And now you can kind of get a hold of something, right?
It's all virtual. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, and going back to whoever was a developer of AWS did not ask a network guy how to do it. So, you know, it's some benefit of actually learning ways to do stuff. Like I was just explaining, I did a presentation a couple of days ago where I was trying to tell people that, you know, in learning, at least for us, right, in learning networking, you're able to look at the macro. You're able to look and say, okay, this is what somebody's whole network's doing, and then you kind of drill in, you know, learn from the macro down to the micro. For me, in learning to be a developer, I could not start at the macro. I had to start at the micro because I'm gonna tell you, for me to understand what something like JSON and XML was, it took me a couple of weeks, and now I can explain in 5 minutes, right? Even less than that, right? But it took me so long to be able to visualize it and really be confident that I knew what it was. You know what I mean? I was calling it a programming language for a while, you know? So obviously that's one of my pitfalls of learning. You start learning in the micro and at least try to connect the dots. And for me, that's how I learn. I'm learning to be a developer. So.
Yeah, I think it helps if you have a specific problem you want to solve, and then you just kind of like, I just still do a ridiculous amount of Googling and Stack Overflow, and I don't even think I have an account, but like, it's like, honestly, all we do is Google things, right? And
I'm gonna cut that out. Dude. It's hard to say that on the review process, you know? Yeah, I deserve a raise. I use Google quite a bit.
Well, I mean, I think we talk about this all the time on, you know, even though AWS calls it different, GCP calls it different, I mean, they're all, the constructs names change, but the fundamentals of two endpoints connecting and passing traffic between each other, that doesn't change, right? So for your question about what the developer can learn, those networking fundamentals of knowing the difference between like layer 2 and layer 3, right? And, you know, subnet versus a MAC address, right?
yeah, absolutely.
That's valuable, right?
I think it's just like, it's a little risky. Like it's the historical thing is like how many Mongo servers end up, you know, completely on the public internet, right? Those tools give you so many building blocks. It's easy to set it up kind of in the wrong way. So at least be thinking about the security, about who should be able to get to this thing, right? You know, learn what bastion hosts are, and you know, learn security groups and learn firewalls and all those other things. It's a lot for some, especially for developers, just like, I'm taking this one app, I'm used to it running on my laptop. What does it look like in production? Well, it's not just that I'm running 2 copies of the server and an external database. It's actually like a whole lot more than that.
Right. So.
Well, I think that's what cloud is really. And I mean, I talk to so many customers that want to move to AWS, and they think that the things like firewalls and all this other security stuff that, you know, you have in a normal data center are just there fundamentally, and it's not, you know. I mean, you got to know that in any cloud you go to.
For sure.
All right, guys, thank you. This has been a great conversation. I'm glad that I'm glad you guys actually showed up today. It's great. It's Friday, you know. Michael, brilliant. Thank you. It's been a blast. Thank you for sharing with us, and we'll see you next time.
Yeah, thank you very much, Michael.
Very much for having me.
Yeah,
Thanks,
thanks
Michael.
guys.
Don't go anywhere.
Thanks, Michael.
I just closed it out.
Okay.
Michael, that was awesome. Did Michael jump already?
No, he's here.
Oh, okay. Oh my goodness.
So very instinctive.
Thanks, guys. I love the tangent on that as well. I think this one, as we talked about a lot of stuff on this one. It's great. We have flexibility with you. We did not have flexibility with Vent Surf, so we made it up with you, and I love it.
The writer of everything you had to talk about.
Yeah, we had to. Yeah, it was
IPv8.
and then we had we had to actually tell him what we wanted to ask him, and then we had a guy Abdel who decided to bombard him anyway. Yeah, I have a couple questions. Hey, it's too late.
Okay.
Real quick, he had to get us a call. Now, Michael, did the rock chisel come up the other day? I don't remember that.
I think I snuck it in there. I'm not sure if I did.
Yeah, no, I mean it's very interesting, and like I mean I'm even thinking about it, not just documentation of code, but also of projects, right? Because as network engineers and stuff, I mean a lot of times there's not enough hours in the project that have been budgeted and scoped to do the documentation, right?
Yeah, people are trying to use like Hugo now, and I just didn't like it because it was Go. So I was like, if I need to work on it, I want something I can work on. But it's really dumb. There's almost no error handling now, but like it works. So maybe you don't need it.
No, hold on. Have you, Rick with the beard? Have you your collaboration, right?
I'm more data center and cloud now.
Stop it. You ever heard of uplinks?
No, I've never heard of uplink.
Hey, Abdel, have you heard of uplinks? I know your collab.
No, but no, I haven't.
So
What's about?
Automatic dial plan documentation tools, is it?
Yeah, it actually is an as built, but it's actually goes through and you put your systems in, it goes in and creates whole HTML as built for every device in there, and then it spits it into a Word doc for you, so you can give it to your customer. So it takes me about 10 minutes at the end of a project to run that and to sit it. And every time I pay for a license, I'm like, man, these guys are making a fortune off this, reporting tool. And I think, hey, maybe we should start writing reporting tools.
Is it uplink?
Yeah,
Uplink?
yeah. I have heard of
Things are easier than
Sorry,
big things.
that's true. Yeah.
You said what?
I said small things are sometimes easier than big things. Like it's a matter of like, do you know this market and what people are going to pay for? But yeah, it's like Ansible is like writing systems automation software. That's like a trap. Don't do that.
Really?
Well, it's all the modules, just because it like has to do everything, and then the problem with like everything just keeps changing. So like versions and operating systems, they never stop breaking.
I'm looking low hanging fruit is coming up with a software that just does documentation. Nobody reads documentation. Nobody. You give it to your customer, they don't read it. Nobody reads it. Nobody reads documentation.
Actually,
It looks pretty. If you have if you put a logo on there and put somebody's name on there so they know who to blame, that's documentation. Nobody reads it.
That's the Ansible module.
and the documentation problem is a really old one because it hasn't changed over the last decades, really.
Well, just the format change, and that's what we got to do.
I think if you can do
Could be right there.
right and make it searchable, like where they can just Google their own stuff, right? That's really the key, where you're getting less information, but you're getting the right information when you need it.
What are you talking about? Googling documentation? What? Say it again.
No, like so you're as built, right? You said nobody reads documentation, right? Project documentation.
Right.
So instead of creating these nice, pretty documents, right, of 300 pages that nobody's going to look at, you create a way for them to basically Google the as-built.
No, they'll read it. I don't want them to read it. I just want to close the product.
You want to check a box and close the project out.
Because look. Okay, so I'm
The jacket came
no,
unzipped.
I'm gonna be honest with you, and this is not just a technology error. This is everywhere. Okay, there's no project, no work where you generate 300 pages of information, and somewhere along the line you're doing a lot of cut and pasting. That's it. You know. So I just need something, no matter what you're doing, to be able to spit out maybe 10 pages of useful information, and then a rest of, but the fluff. But as someone who does projects, in any industry, it'd be nice to close out a project with a point, click, and bam, this looks pretty.
Hey, you don't write documentation.
Sorry, Ray. Does that uplinks do your ACI documentation and your data center stuff, or is it just a collab tool?
It's just voice. For the beauty about data center documentation, as we go into this world called programmability, is Python scripts are large. so when you put those in documentation, that's about 100 pages right there. So nobody's going to read that. Nobody's going to read Python scripting, so, but they'll pay for it because that's a great way to close out a project.
Right.
But it would be nice. I mean, if there was, reporting tools, and I'm sorry, Michael put me onto this. When I saw when he did that, I'm like, there's two things that he just did that he doesn't know how much money is in that. Number one is when you put out, when you did the graphs, information systems, technology professionals, all they want is graphs. CIOs, CTOs, if you put a graph,
they're not going to do anything with them, but they have once they see them, you can sell things. Yeah.
Yeah, that's how ServiceNow sells, right?
So if you were able, and just like we're coming into this world of programmability, if you're able to put together a system, and I saw it has hooks into GitHub, whatever, or lose it. But if you're able to put in something and say, look, you're network engineers, I know you don't trust them, but I got something for you to be able to keep tabs of them and to be able to show, their productivity. And that sells. I promise you it will sell. The documentation. If someone was able to sit down, and I'm looking at, I was looking at what you're putting together, and if someone was able to say, because most projects we do are cookie cutter. In the world of technology, in enterprises, right? Not service provider. When I was in a service provider, everything was custom. Everything was custom. You're doing a lot of interoperabilities, but in the enterprise, I'm gonna be honest with you. I look to say, man, there's a lot of people getting a paycheck for doing nothing, and it's basically cutting and pasting. Everything you do is.
Are there like particular formats of things that people are expecting reports from? Like,
it doesn't change. Yes, it's specific, not formats, right? You can make your own format, but like for example, the way we do designs in the enterprise arena, right? Nothing's really vetted out. We may have some interoperability questions, but for the most part, 3/4 of what you're putting together is the same for every customer, right? Yeah. So to be able to come in, you already have a model of what it looks like. For example, and guys, you guys for SD-WAN, you already have a model of what it's going to look like when it's done. You may have 4 or 5 more nodes than you thought you would, but pretty much the same. So if you were able to spit out documentation based on connecting to the database, right? Just, and just grabbing information, putting it into your document, and bam, you can have something that was already pretty much templated and spit out in documentation. And a Cisco partner, or guys that are doing this, consultants even they'll pay money just to have it, because that end of the project documentation always takes the longest.
Oh, so there's like a physical build out at the end.
Yes, it's a deliverable.
That your ads builds. Yeah,
right. So you can actually make money just spitting those off, and I'm saying just in this community alone, for enterprises, right? It's cookie cutter. It's pretty much the same. No matter what technology you're in, 99% of your design is pretty much done already. So, and so you can put out, that tool for documentation, and you can make money. You'll make money. A lot. Let's get together. Screw these guys, Michael. Me and you, we'll talk about it.
But that's not